Good evening again. Thank you. Fantastic. The live stream started so we can start our amazing evening. Good evening, everyone, and welcome one and all to our third lecture in the series entitled Folly Presto in the historic Gifford Lecture Series, a jazz-soaked philosophy for our catastrophic times, from Socrates to Coltrane, delivered, of course, by our distinguished speaker and guest, Professor Cornel West. My name is Sarah Prescott. I'm a Professor of English Literature at Edinburgh. I'm also Vice Principal and Head of the College of Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences. And it is my honour and privilege to open this third lecture. But before I formally do that, I want to recognise that we do have new faces in the room. Sometimes the audience does change from evening to evening, and of course others joining us from our live stream. So I am going to say a few words about the lecture series, the wider university, and of course about our speaker. So as my colleague and Deputy Head of College, Professor David Smith, said in the first lecture, the University of Edinburgh has been influencing history since it opened the gates to its students in 1583. Following the Scottish Enlightenment of the 18th century, the university was positioned at the forefront of academia and critical thinking. And due to the determination and perseverance of a group of Edinburgh intellectuals, established facts about the world were being boldly and consistently challenged. And we like to feel we still have that ethos at Edinburgh, of course. Through the many achievements of its staff and students, the university then has continued this trajectory. It continues to present cutting-edge research, inspirational teaching, and innovative thinking as its central ethos, attracting some of the great minds from around the globe. The College of Arts and Humanities and Social Sciences is one of 3 academic colleges at the University of Edinburgh, and I always like to say it is the largest by quite some way. We have over 4,500 staff and over 26,000 students at all levels of entry from about over 160 different countries. Our world-leading research and teaching spans across an impressive breadth of disciplines and these are only for example, because I will probably leave somebody out. So, for example, business, education, law, sport, politics, philosophy, psychology, languages, and linguistics. We are, of course, also home to New College, the School of Divinity, one of the largest centres for the teaching and research of theology and religious studies in the United Kingdom. And we also include the Edinburgh College of Art in the college as well, in itself a college. And in that college, we also have the School of Music, which is pertinent for these lectures. We're also host to the Edinburgh Futures Institute, whose core mission is developing insights from across disciplines to apply them to complex challenges. They might be organisational, cultural, social, or indeed planetary, to enable transformational, sustainable and ethical innovation and change. I would encourage you who haven't been to Edinburgh, visiting Edinburgh, or indeed those in Edinburgh who haven't seen the building yet, to view the incredible EFI building, which has been completely transformed from the iconic Category A listed Old Royal Infirmary to this space for multidisciplinary collaboration, data-led innovation, education, research and partnerships. It's also a remarkable act of civic regeneration and recovery, which will also build on the university's links to the community in Edinburgh, in Scotland and beyond to the world. So we're incredibly proud of the Edinburgh Futures Institute. We're incredibly proud also to host a thriving international academic community joined in its commitment to individuals, communities and societies across the world. And of course, this community extends beyond the college, the institute, and indeed the university to our friends and colleagues here today, as well as to the illustrious international field of scholars we've been fortunate enough to host throughout the history of the Gifford Lecture Series. So for over a century, Edinburgh has enabled the advancement of theological and philosophical thought through this series, particularly, but more generally, of course. But joining a distinguished list of scholars, such as Henri Bergson, Reinhold Niebuhr, Iris Murdoch, Geoffrey Stout, who is also here today, and Mary Beard, we are delighted to say, is also Professor Cornel West. Professor Cornel West, affectionately known to many as Brother West, is the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Chair at Union Theological Seminary. Dr. West teaches on the works of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, as well as courses in philosophy of religion, African-American critical thought, and a wide range of subjects, including, but by no means limited to, the classics, philosophy, politics, cultural theory, literature, and of course, music. In this lecture, Professor West will give his consideration of early modern philosophy's focus on Erasmus's The Praise of Folly from 1511 and Montaigne's Essays from 1580, as responses to an era that saw devastating religious warfare, plagues and famines, and also, of course, the onset of European imperial conquests. The great public intellectual Erasmus of Rotterdam famously directed his classical work to the absurdity, indeterminacy, and frailty of human societies. Montaigne's self-explorations, including, of course, the famous essays of Cannibals, 1580, and of Coaches, 1588, were among the first philosophic reflections on the barbaric European colonization of the New World. Erasmus and Montaigne were also, of course, and appropriately, trailblazing examples of blues, swing, and improvisation in philosophy, and they faced off dark folly with a freestyle soul craft. So we're getting excited now for the lecture. So, Professor, philosopher, author, activist, Brother West, I'm delighted to welcome you to the stage for your third lecture, Folly Presto. Enjoy.
Salute my dear sister Sarah Presto, VP. And that's a lot of high quality leadership that you exert, given all of the precious students here that you impact. I've had a chance to meet a number of the students here at the University of Edinburgh, and they are highly impressive indeed. In fact, some of them were there at the Wellington statue the other day, in solidarity once again with what's going on in Gaza with our precious Palestinian brothers and sisters. These lectures for me allow me, Kairos moments, to have such elated joy in heart, because it allows me to see some old friends that I haven't seen for a long time. I'm sitting here looking at Roberto Garcia and Cookie Garcia. This brother was my roommate in college. Just a few weeks ago, but roommate in college, and I can just see them now. They were in love then, they're in love now, and they've flown all the way from the States. Let's give it up for the Garcia. The same is true with the distinguished Professor Joe Evans, who holds a chair in the name of one of the towering prophetic figures of contemporary Christendom. His name is J. Alfred Smith, but he holds the J. Alfred Smith Chair at Berkeley School of Theology. He's come from California. Just wave, my brother. Wave, my brother. So good to see you. So good to see you. You can stand up. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And last but not least is one of the great path blazers and pioneers of this institution. He's straight from Jamaica. He's a distinguished natural scientist. His name is Professor Jeff Palmer. Where is he? Stand up, my dear brother. So, like Erasmus, I always try to keep my piety centered. In fact, the worst thing Luther ever said to Erasmus is, "You are not pious." That's about as ad hominem as it gets for somebody like Erasmus. I dare you, Martin. What kind of monopoly on piety do you have to use that kind of language? One of the things that I've always tried to do in my life is to enact the best of the jazz-soaked philosophical tradition that says we ought to be not just humble, ought to be not just patient, but we ought to be open-minded enough to jump into the skin of others and walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. You get a sense of how they view the world. So Martin Luther had much to say. In fact, one of his great contributions is God's two great gifts to humankind is the Word of God and music. And he himself was a fine composer. A mighty fortress is our God. That's Martin Luther. Of course, he underside the vicious hatred of Jews, the suppression of peasants, the patriarchy. We can go on and on, but we always have a dialectical reading here. We keep track of the best. We keep track of the worst. A few days ago, we left Thomas More in the Tower of London, raising the question, why is it that Socrates never cries and Jesus never laughs? You could have added Socrates did laugh twice. He laughs in the Phaedo. The second time he laughs when Crito asked him in the Phaedo in line 115C, he says, how shall we bury you? And Socrates says, if you can catch me, I'll go through your fingers. Don't worry about me. Sense of the comic, yes. Very underdeveloped. No deep sense of the tragic. No weeping like Jesus for Lazarus, for Jerusalem. Jazz-soaked philosophy connects the catastrophic with the tragic comic. It is a very distinctive lens through which you look at philosophical traditions from wherever they come from. And I'm primarily preoccupied with Athens, Rome, Jerusalem, London, Paris, Harlem, Sacramento, California, Lagos, and a little Jamaica, though, Professor Palmas. Little Jamaica. And I said little Jamaica because Jamaica's too rich and deep for a New World African from Sacramento like me, but we're connected in a variety of different ways. And so it means then that you conceive of yourself in regard to your humanity in the form of, first and foremost, parrhesia. And that's what Socrates says in line 24a in Plato's Apology. Parrhesia is the cause of my unpopularity. I will actually be put to death precisely because of my parrhesia, my plain speech, my frank speech, my unintimidated speech. Foucault, in his French sensibility, translates it as fearless speech in his wonderful Lectures in Paris. It's not just free speech, because we associate that more with libertarian discourse. No. We're talking about what we started this lecture series as a whole with Lucretius in that third chapter. It's a speech that comes from the depth of your heart, especially in a moment of catastrophe, which defines who you fundamentally are in terms of your quest for integrity, honesty, decency, and sense of character. Thomas Paine is right. There are certain times that test us, and we find out exactly who we fundamentally and really are. And those are the moments where our paideia either kicks in strong or goes limp. The deep formations of attention that we talked about 2 days ago. That deep cultivation of critical attunement and discernment. And that deep maturation, I keep coming back to that mature that we saw in Max Weber's second essay on politics and vocation, that mature human being that connects ethics of conviction with ethics of responsibility. I was blessed to give a commencement address at St. John's College. St. John's College is one of the illustrious institutions of higher learning in the American Empire. One's in Annapolis, Maryland, the other's in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And they said, we'd love to ask you to speak on our curriculum, because they teach only the great books, the canonical texts. And of course, it's always fascinating to bring in a black man to reflect on the dead white brothers, many of whom are profound, have much to say, unsettle us, challenge us, and yet are shot through with a whole host of other evils at the same time. And so I quite enthusiastically said, yes, I can't wait to get a chance to exercise my parrhesia in that context. And I looked at the curriculum, and I said, oh, you've got some powerful ones. I see Sophocles there, preoccupied with phronesis, and Antigone herself, who Hegel said was more angelic than Socrates himself in his lectures on this text. I saw Euripides in all of his sophistication, all the way through Augustine. And I always like to zero in on Augustine, not just because he's African, but because he's touched my soul in such a way that I was very different when I put down the Confessions vis-a-vis picking it up. And Aquinas, Middle Ages, Dark Ages, no, whole lot of light and enlightenment during that period. Dante, we're going to talk more about Dante when we get to T.S. Eliot. No Eliot without Dante. All the way through. But I said, I noticed there's no comic writers for the most part. They had a little Aristophanes, a touch. No! Aristophanes is as Greek as Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. Why is it we have such underdeveloped perceptions and underdeveloped sensibilities when it comes to the comic and the tragic comic? Is it the case that that's a way of avoiding and evading the catastrophic? Or is it the case that when we turn to the catastrophic, we fear misanthropy? We fear Jonathan Swift. We fear the late Mark Twain, that poor damn human race that has no possibilities, no potentiality whatsoever. And we already saw it with the early definition of our brother David Hume. Human history, that march of madness, imbecility, and wickedness, with very few moments of counter images and counter movements against it. We are so fearful of that grimness, fearful of that. And so in my lecture, I had to begin to read a little Chekhov. Because Chekhov, much later, and he feeds into all of the grimness and the darkness with his deep sense of the comic. And so much of what I have to say is Chekhovian, and I apologize for not being able to give a whole series of lectures on Chekhov and the blues, because Chekhov and the blues go hand in hand in terms of them emerging almost simultaneously in the Russian Empire, which people had downplayed at the time he's writing, which become the second most powerful empire after the age of Europe, after 1945. And then the blues in the American Empire on the underside. Oh, these black folk, Jim Crow, Jane Crow, degraded, subjugated, and yet able to raise their intellect, their hearts, their minds to engage in forms of truth-telling and justice-seeking that's not just politics. It's conceptions of what it means to be human, and they're mobilizing some of the most powerful insights from legacies of Athens, but not just Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, but it's Aeschylus, it's Euripides, it's Sophocles, it's historians, it's Thucydides, Herodotus, and it's Aristophanes. When we come to our dear brother today. It's also Lucian. And I talk primarily about Lucian at that lecture at St. John's. What is it about that brother from Syria, in the middle of the Roman Empire, himself comic all the way down? And that same Thomas More, who we left in the Tower of London, about to meet his execution. Even though he had played his role in executing others, but each execution is separate. Each life is precious. That Erasmus will begin with love, a dedication for the deep friendship of Erasmus and Thomas More. More in comdium. Use his very name in the Latin title. In the brief preface, he says, I just happened to be coming on horseback. It reminds us of Julius Caesar riding on horseback. Napoleon tried to ride on horseback, but couldn't. With ideas. And I'm going to write this in 1 week. On his way from Italy to see his dear, dear friend, Philia, a deep form of love. So oftentimes we begin these lectures, love connections. That's very jazz-like. Love connections. How do you sustain yourself in the face of overwhelming catastrophes? That links a love to a laughter. That links a wrestling with folly and foolishness to fantasia. We're going to see that more worked out in Vico's great text. Imagination that authorizes alternative futures. We see it with the younger generation, talking about Afrofuturism. They use a certain kind of post-structuralist language, given that they're still tied to reading Derrida, Foucault, and Heidegger. We get through the jargon and you see, oh, you're sounding like your grandmama. She didn't know Foucault. She didn't know Heidegger. She didn't know C.L.R. James. But she knew suffering. She knew pain. She knew what it's like to have, in the language of the great Howard Thurman, your back against the wall. Howard Thurman was the author of Jesus and the Disinherited. That's the book Martin Luther King traveled everywhere with in his back pocket. And the language that she would use was, how do we attempt to shatter this so-called worldly wisdom that is coming at me, dehumanizing, subjugating, dominating, occupying, oppressing, exploiting me, and say and do and act foolish in the eyes of that world. Just to say, black is beautiful. That's foolish. How come? It's supposed to be ugly. Well, you call Socrates ugly. How come? He had a snub nose like a genius named Curtis Mayfield. No, he's beautiful. Aesop, you said the same thing. My dear brother Dwight McKee reminds me all the time. Slave, snub nose. Foolish. Really? Montaigne doesn't think so. And the Cannibals, no, not at all. He knows it's contextual. He knows, in fact, that human beings have perceptions of truth and goodness and beauty, not in a vulgar, sophomoric, relativistic way of anything goes, but knowing if you have enough empathy and imagination to get in the skin of other people and get a sense of how they are viewing the world, then lo and behold, you might become educated in a serious way. You might actually be able to take seriously and substantively paideia, the very thing that people have been talking about for thousands of years in the West. The best of the West, but the crimes of the worst of the West. That's how Erasmus begins. And keep in mind, Erasmus, very much like for me, the greatest painter of Europe, and in some way the greatest painter of all time, but this is just my own humble opinion, but I'm not a relativist, I think I'm right about this. Which is a Rembrandt. Rembrandt is, he means the world to me. I won't take a bullet like Jeff for him, but the prodigal son, which my beloved wife bought for me and puts on my wall in my office. It moves me every time I see it. It's Netherlands at its best. His connection with the Mennonites and the Jews of that city. Connecting it with the Spinozas of the world. Made their way to Netherlands, given the vicious anti-Jewish hatred institutionalized with the expulsion, their expulsion in Spain, initiating the age of Europe internally. Inability to come to terms with catastrophes visited upon Jews, inability to come to terms with catastrophes visited upon Muslims, inability to come to terms with catastrophes visited upon indigenous peoples in the New World. And each and every one of those realities, though it took centuries, came back not just to haunt Europe, but it called into question the very foundations of Europe with levels of violence and atrocity we can't conceive of 1492 to 1945. And yet in so many ways, as we'll see when we get to Du Bois, so much has been visited on Africans, so much already visited on indigenous peoples, would then be visited on those inside of Europe in a more vicious way. And it took a while for the world to understand what genocide really was. Because when it's visited upon non-Europeans, it's sad, it's heartbreaking, but it's not the kind of catastrophe that it is when it's those inside of Europe. And we're going to see that even with Montaigne, with those 8 wars of religion beginning in March of 1532, all the way to 1598. Unbelievable. 10,000 of our precious Huguenots gone August 24, 1872 in St. Bartholomew's. Moment of barbarity. Ugly, indeed. But in the end, still has a different kind of status if it takes place in Jamaica, but takes place in Haiti, takes place in India, but takes place in the Congo, but takes place outside of Europe. So we've got to have as I mentioned in the last lecture, a synoptic vision that connects all of these various parts, that is polyphonic, crucial, polyphonic. That's even different than just Socratic, because Socrates talks about the dialogical, and the dialogical is very important. It's played a crucial role in the history of Western philosophy. It could be Gadamer, it could be J. Collingwood, it could be Martin Buber. All these are dialogical thinkers. Jazz is polyphonic. Why? Because you already got many voices inside of you even before you come to the conversation. The polyphonic is not just many voices. No, not at all. There's so many different Erasmuses in his text, and there's a whole host of different voices in Montaigne at the same time. Contradictions, incongruities shot through his text. Now, of course, Whitman and others would say, I'm a multitude of voices and contradictions. Walt Whitman, we understand. You're just being honest about what all of us have been. Absolutely. What's also crucial about starting with Erasmus, and it's sad that Erasmus oftentimes is being marginalized. I was just at this wonderful new college space. I can tell how consecrated it is with John Knox up there waving to the world. God bless him and be with him. Definitely, we love my Presbyterians. I'm telling you, absolutely. Where was I? No, I'm just kidding. You're all so kind. No, with the polyphonic voices inside of us, that generates the humility and the maturity I've been talking about throughout these That's why it's hard to be a blues young person who sings deeply. You have to have undergone experience. And if you avoid experience, there'll never be any phronesis, never be any prudence. Emerson's essay on experience, Brother Jeff has written the most powerful essay on Ralph Ellison's experience. Honing out the phronesis that Sophocles ends Antigone with, holding out the phronesis that Aristotle and Aquinas write so much about. Well, let me get to the text. And I want to begin with this wonderful moment of self-parody. This is almost vintage Erasmus. He said, let's now compare the lot of a wise man with that of a clown. Imagine some paragon of wisdom that's set up against him. A man who has frittered away all his boyhood and youth in acquiring learning, has lost the happiest part of his life in endless wakeful nights, toil and care, never tastes a drop of pleasure even in what's left to him. He's always thrifty, impoverished, miserable, grumpy, harsh, and unjust to himself, disagreeable and unpopular with his fellows, pale, thin, sickly, weary-eyed, prematurely white-haired, senile, worn out, and dying before his time. That's Erasmus. What a moment. Courage to laugh at yourself and connect it with a tenacity of purpose. That's Charlie Mingus on his bass. The comic genius in the history of jazz. Laughing at himself. The name of his autobiography is what? Beneath the Underdog. Come on out, Brother Charlie. No. I'm beneath the underdog. But listen to what I got to say about Mississippi. Listen to what I've got to say about Elaine, Arkansas, that 1919, the same year that Weber gives his second vocation lecture in that red summer where thousands and thousands of black folk are murdered and lynched within 3 months, called the Red Summer. Charlie Mingus, among a whole host of other voices, the catastrophic and the comic, parrhesia, fearless speech, unintimidated speech. So it is with Erasmus. And what does Charlie Mingus and Erasmus have in common? A profound commitment to what our Greek brothers and sisters thousands of years ago called arete, excellence. There's a virtuosity in the performance. And you can't downplay that mastery of craft and technique. So it goes beyond Horace. This is not just about to instruct and to delight. This is about moving people at the deepest level, at the visceral level of who they are as human beings, that invoke remembrances and memories of those who have gone into the shaping of them and gives them a sense of connecting them to their loved ones who come after. Those 3 dimensions of time that Augustine makes so much of in the Confessions, the past, the present, and the future. And it's no accident that Erasmus himself, who father was a priest, never married. So he's had to wrestle with that sense of being perceived, sadly, tragically, as an orphan. Both parents died in the plague within months. He's in the world all by himself with his older brother, who had the same priest father, Gerard, and Margaret, their mother. Both died. It's study as deliverance. Erasmus has a wonderful line in one of his famous adages. He says, we must live as if we are going to die tomorrow and study as if we're going to live forever. As paideia, as liberation, as salvation, as fortitude. I'm going to throw my all into my studies, but my studies will not be abstract and abstruse. They will be wrestling with life and death and joy and sorrow. They will drip with blood and sweat and tears. And I'm going to hold on to the best of the medieval tradition. What do you mean, hold on to the best of the medieval tradition? We thought you were a radical break. No, there's no such thing as a radical break based on a clean slate. That's some construct of an academic fighting for tenure. Well, you got to say something new to get attention to yourself. See, where do I even come up with the conception of the ship of fools? Well, there's a Sebastian Brandt that writes the classic in 1494. He's got 112 fools and 112 chapters. And the last chapter is the wise man. Who's the wise man? Socrates. You got this German Christian talking about Socrates. The epigraph of that chapter, Virgil. Read Virgil and you understand why prudence is so rare but also so crucial. Interesting. So it will be with Erasmus. He says, Saint Socrates, pray for me. Pretty ecumenical back then. Saint Socrates, pray for me. But there will be a break. Because Sebastian Brandt, building on earlier conceptions of fools, the dance of death on the ship of fools. We're going to say much more about that dance of death. That's going to be a play by August Strindberg. That is the basis of The Iceman Cometh of Eugene O'Neill. Fascinating connection. The Ship of Death, great novel in the 20s of Sister Catherine Mansfield writes. But the ship of fools, meaning what? Well, Brandt is going to reflect on a text about fools, and he's going to be putting them down. Very traditional, still very powerful. I'm moved by it. It's the first reference in early modern Europe to Columbus himself, who made the voyage 2 years earlier, 1492. Fascinating, in chapter 66. I wish I had time to read it, but you all take my word, you can tend to read yourself. Very much so. Chapter 99, the decay of empires. Spiritual decay and moral decadence shot through my time. That's Sebastian Brandt. And fools always, as in Shakespeare's indescribable and inimitable plays of unbelievable genius, the fools at their best, as in King Lear, truth tellers, teasing out the cracks of edifices that are about to collapse. Takes Lear a long time. But at least Lear does have tears at the end. He cries for fool. At the end has some kind of maturation. Yes, the howls at the end of that play. Shakespeare, of course, at the height, pulling from so much of the best of the West of his day. But what Erasmus is going to do is to accent the orality. My dear sister was talking about the wonderful work that you do on early woman writers and novelists, where the oral plays a very important role, so it's very hard to recuperate it in the same way that we do the Jane Austens who women but also wrote, or the George Eliots who wrote but had to use pseudonyms and so on. And my jazz-soaked tradition and my jazz-soaked philosophy puts a lot of premium on the oral. And that's one way of talking about its connections to the preoccupation with eloquence that come out of pagan Rome, of Cicero and Quintilian and company. So that speaking well and acting well and writing well are all tied together. This is not sophistry that you get with the Greeks, where you speak well in order to pursue unjust causes. We get this among the legal profession, probably a bit too much these days, but I don't want to trash any profession. Erasmus does that for me today in this text. I'm going to read a little bit about some of these professional folk he's got to say. But I do want to accent the role of orality. And I'm thoroughly convinced that one of the reasons why music can and must play a fundamental role in mobilizing the best of wherever we are, the West, the East, the South, the North, is that with a certain kind of heartfelt, self-emptying orality, we might be able to touch people deeply to get them to engage in what Plato called for in the Republic, which is that turning of the soul. Now, we Christians, we've had this for a long time in terms of metanoia. Absolutely. And I come from a black church tradition, the Gardner Taylors. Oh, yes. Pray for your winds. Oh, my God, yes, these are, even just to mention some of these names, Sandy Ray's and so many others, Manuel Scott's seniors. These are the ones, C.L. Franklin, the father of a genius named Aretha. She was already a genius. These are not just preachers who move us, who are emotional. They come out of a Ciceroian tradition. They don't even need Cicero, didn't even have to read them because they come out of an African tradition too, in which the griots and those with oral power, with vibration in their language and in their hearts and minds that touches the people, that gives them a sense of hope when they feel as if they have a chance of a snowball in hell. Daily, monthly, yearly, yes, just like the music, hanging on every note, every sentence. And as Emerson says about Montaigne's essay, you cut those sentences and they bleed. You cut those vibratos of expressions and they bleed because there's human beings down there. It's like in Gaza right now. Possible escalation of invasion. This is not a matter of just policy. These are human beings down there. And they bleed like everybody else, just like us. And it's not moralistic in the cheap sense to invoke it, because all of us ought to be connected at that level. So it is in our quest for paideia. So it is in our university. So it is in our professional managerial spots. So it is on the block. So it is in our squares. That's jazz-soaked philosophical ways of being in the world that begin with self-parity, begin with critique. Now, I know you might be anxious for me to read what he has to say about philosophers, given that this is the Gifford Lectures. And it might be a little harsh, but I think I owe it to you and me to read it myself. He says, the lawyers, the most self-satisfied class of people, the sophists and dialecticians, any of them would be a match for 20 pick women in garrulity. And of course, the sexism is deep here. And Erasmus also is tied to an anti-Jewish hatred we cannot downplay, just like so many of the great Russian writers, with the exception of Chekhov. Couldn't come to terms with the Jewish humanity. But truth tell us to the core. But here's Erasmus on philosophers. These philosophers cloaked and bearded to command respect, to insist that they alone have wisdom, and all of the mortals are but fleeting shadows. Reminds me of what Chekhov said about philosophers. I can't stand most of them because they view themselves as generals and all they want to do is enlist you in their army. And he's pulling from the great text of Lucian, called Philosophers for Sale. This is a text that I've always assigned in my classes for undergrads and graduate students who are interested in philosophy. Read Lucian on Philosophers for Sale. And they come to the market and they present a Platonist. How much money would you pay for a Platonist? How much money would you pay for Aristotelian? How much money would you pay for an Epicurean? How much money would you pay for a Stoic? Well, Diogenes, he's got high value. Meaning what? It's hyperbolic, it's exaggerated, absolutely right, but it's concerned about what? Teasing out certain truths. And it's leading toward the grotesque. There's no doubt about that. And it will lead toward the great Rabelais, with his grotesque Gargantua and Pantagruel, and that wonderful letter that he writes to Erasmus 3.5 years before Erasmus dies in December of 1532. He says, I'm told that you're looking for texts of St. Jerome, your favorite. I went to Italy and bought them, and I send it to you. And I want you to know that you are my mother, you are my father. I do not exist without you, and I have texts that are on the way that are a tribute to you. That's Rabelais to Erasmus. The grotesque, fantasia, hyper-exaggeration, yes, but concerned about catastrophe, with an unbelievable sense of the comic and incongruity. What else about these philosophers? Theirs is certainly a pleasant form of madness, which sets them building countless universes and measuring the sun, moon, stars, planets by rule of thumb, or a bit of string, and producing reasons for thunderbolts, winds, eclipses, and other inexplicable phenomena. They never pause for a moment, as if they'd access to the secrets of nature, architects of the universe that come to us straight from the councils of the gods. He's talking about the arrogant and the condescension. He's not talking about any philosophers in this group. We know you all overcome that. And for all you find yourselves outside of this kind of crude characterization. But their lack of certainty is obvious enough from the endless contention among themselves on every single point. They know nothing at all, and yet they claim to know everything, though ignorant even of themselves and sometimes not able to see the ditch, a stone lying in their path. Ooh, that's an echo of Aristophanes' characterization of Socrates in the clouds. Head in the sky, falling into ditches on the ground. Either because most of them are half blind or their minds are far away, and how they despise the vulgar crowd. Whenever they bring out their triangles and similar mathematical diagrams piled on top of each other, it goes on and on. Then the next paragraph. Then there are the theologians. I've got to read this one. Oh, and I love James Cohen. I know he's looking down on me, but brother, I know you listening too. A remarkably supercilious and touchy lot. That's how he comes out of the blocks. I might perhaps do better to pass over them in silence without the stirring of the mud of Camarina. You know, that was a swamp that drained against Apollo's orders, usually the cause of one's own ruin. He said, lest they marshal their forces for an attack from immeasurable conclusions and force me to eat my words. If I refuse, they'll denounce me as a heretic on the spot. This text was put on the index of the Catholic Church in 1559, as was Rabelais' text for hundreds of years. Both Catholic, capital C, but in their own distinctive ways, truth tellers. You see. For this is the bolt they always loose on anybody to whom they take a dislike. Now, there are none so unwilling to recognize my good services to them, and yet they're under obligation to me on several important counts, nobly for their happiness and their self-love, which enables them to dwell in a sort of third heaven, looking down from aloof, almost with pity on the rest of mankind, as many cattle crawling on the face of the earth, fortified with armies of schoolmen's definitions, conclusions, propositions, both explicit and implicit. I won't read the rest, but you get the sense of what we're talking about. And then, of course, he ends with probably one of the most famous sentences in this text. He says, such is the erudition and complexity they all display that I fancy the apostles themselves would need the help of another Holy Spirit if they were obliged to join issue on these topics with our new breed of theologians. You know why he was hated at University of Paris. He was obtaining a degree from University of Paris, but never, ever stayed there. And I've mentioned before, when I think of Erasmus, I think of George Buchanan from Scotland. He's the only name that can be mentioned simultaneously with that of Erasmus. And he would be the teacher of Montaigne and also Calvin in the college of University of Paris, the various colleges that they had, and he playing that crucial role. And the wonderful references of Montaigne to the tragedies and the plays of George Buchanan, that Scotsman who remained Catholic up until his late 40s and then shifts to his beloved Church of Scotland. Yes, indeed. I'm told we got a leader from the Church of Scotland here. Is that right, my dear sister? Indeed, your name is?
I'm Sally.
Sister Sally. Give it up for Sister Sally here. Absolutely. One of the great leaders, absolutely. But the important point here again is not simply the condemnation, because what is distinctive about Erasmus is what he's going to do. He's going to take Sebastian Brant's conception of fools and do what? Have Folly herself speak about herself and have Folly engage in a praise of herself in a public address, in an oration. It is an oral context. That's why it's hard to transition to a schoolroom or even a Gifford lecture. You had to conceive of yourself in the same way of conceiving of Demosthenes himself, so powerful speaking, as we shall see on the battlefield, a coward. And why does Erasmus make so much of that? Because he is fundamentally also an anti-war philosopher of Christ, his Philosophia Christi. And that's why he begins his text after the oration talking about war. And I'm going to read it to you. He says, of all the deeds which win praise, isn't war the seed and source? What is more foolish to embark on a struggle of this kind for some reason or other when it does more harm than good to either side? For those who fall in battle are of no account. When the mail-clad ranks confront each other and the trumpets blare out their harsh note, what use, I ask, are those wise men who undergone paideia, undergone high qualities of education, who are worn out with their studies and can scarcely draw breath now that their blood is thin and cold? The need is for sturdy persons with all the daring possible and minimum of brain. Of course, some may prefer a soldier like Demosthenes, who followed the advice of his friends, scarcely glimpsed the enemy before he threw away his shield and fled as cowardly in battle as he was skilled in speech making. And underside, Demosthenes, the exact opposite of a Fannie Lou Hamer and a Martin Luther King Jr. All of that parrhesia, all of that fearless and frank speech, and then tell those precious children in Birmingham, I'm going to jail with you. We're going to fill that jail with 4,000 children under the age of 15, but I'm the first one to go. Come on, Ralph. That's Ralph Abernathy. And I'm not saying this to put Demosthenes down. Well, maybe I am. But I'm just making the difference between cowards who speak powerfully in public and those who speak powerfully in public and then execute. There's nothing sentimental about that. That's not a specious emotion where you titillate all of the grand ideals and principles that you talk about, and when it's time to move on the ground, no one can find you. That's the kind of sentimentality that generates a cynicism of a Jonathan Swift or a cynicism even of a Lucian. And Erasmus says, I will use Socratic irony, I will use Lucianic irony, yes, but I'll always call for not just condemnation, not just to denounce, not just to put down, but to transform. It's very different. Kierkegaard has a wonderful moment in his MA dissertation, The Concept of Irony. He says all these various conceptions of irony tend to generate paralysis, tend to generate inaction and inertia. I have a conception of generative irony. And of course, he connects it, good Lutheran that he is, even though Danish, and I say that not in a pejorative way. But I don't want to assume the Danish to be subsumed under the German Lutherans. He's got his own tradition. But his generative sense of irony is about also action, works of love, deeds of justice, based on courage, the enabling virtue that we've been talking about throughout. So it is with jazz, so philosophy. Yes, indeed, so it is. That if you can't blow your horn, all the bragging in the world before the woodshed moment, before the jam session is empty. And all the beautiful notes you put on the page is sounding brass if you can't blow at the moment in the performance, and each performance will enhance the voices of the other so that your voice, it constitutes a collective voice that will touch the hearts and souls of your collective performance. Again, deep philosophical implications, deep existential implications. That is what he's getting at. And I know it's getting late here, but let's see what he says about Cicero. Cicero, the father of Roman eloquence, always rose to speak in an unseemly state of agitation like a child with hiccups. This is what we talked about. How come? It was very much like Miles Davis. Very much like Miles Davis. Miles Davis wouldn't eat a molecule of food a day before. He always had shoes that were very, very tight. His feet was bigger than his shoes, so he would feel as if he's being pushed. And training others would say he would go into a whole different state before he walked on stage with his horn. And the world thinks he's the coolest cat in the history of modernity. No, he's got inner hiccups, just like Cicero. But then what? If people are half dead of fear when they have to fight only with words, what would they do if the issue was settled by the sword? Ooh, Erasmus. But then we move to the end of the text. And I think I'm running behind, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to save my next lecture for both this end of Erasmus and then Montaigne, and then move toward Vico, because I don't want to be unfair to you. But the end of the text is where the transformation comes. He reads Paul in the New Testament, told Christians to die daily, told Christians that you will be the fools in the eyes of the world, told Christians that the gospel itself is folly in the eyes of the world. Erasmus goes as far as to say Jesus himself is a fool in the eyes of the world. The cross is a scandal and foolish in the eyes of the world. What is going on with Erasmus? Beginning with love, philia, friendship. Now we get this unbelievable connection of the levitas, the laughter, with the gravitas of life and death through his Christian humanist lens, inseparably tied to a discourse of classical literature from Greece and Rome. And at the very end, he even has a call to a certain kind of ecstasy and madness. You got to be mad. And you can imagine with the connections to Cervantes and Don Quixote. You can imagine Shakespeare. You could imagine those towering touchstones that we all must go back to in some way at some point to wrestle with what it means to be human, in exactly the same way that we're going to have to go back to the jazz soap tradition that produced me. Not because I'm competitive with the dead white men, but rather because I am a fallible follower of a Palestinian Jew named Jesus that makes the connection between everybody being contemptible as you get in Swift and Lucian, as opposed to everybody being a cracked vessel with a sense of possibility and potential that can then constitute, by action and deeds and thought and feeling and organizing and community, some possibility in a moment of overwhelming, catastrophic realities. Thank you so very much, and we'll
Thank you very much for that truly polyphonic lecture in every brilliant sense of the word in which you evoked it, but also spoke to it. That was absolutely inspiring. There's a slightly odd format now because we are going to have a break and then come back for questions. So we will have 20 minutes for questions. I'm sure there are lots and lots of questions that people want to ask Professor West. So I have my instructions. So what's going to happen is the room and the live stream will take a short 10-minute comfort break. So I make it so to come back at 1:45, and then we'll come back to the room and to the live stream for the questions and answers. So if we see you in 10 minutes, we come back and we have 20 minutes for questions, which you've kindly agreed is okay with you. So thank you, everybody, and see you in 10 minutes. Thank you, everybody, and now is the time to ask some questions after that absolutely incredible lecture. I'm sure you've got lots of things you want to ask. So we have about 20 minutes till about 10 past. So you need to raise your hand to ask the question, and Dr. West will select which hands that he wants to respond to. And we have our colleagues Molly, who is here, and Andrew at the back. So put your hand up, be selected, and either Molly or Andrew will come with the roving mic, so don't speak until the mic is with you. So thank you very much, and thank you for your generosity in answering the questions, as well as giving that amazing lecture. Thank you.
Thank you. I see my dear brother here, and I think it's my dear brother here and the dear sister here. So we have 3 right in a row, then we'll come back. Is that all right?
Thank you so much, Professor. I'll keep it short to give others some time. There were some fleeting references to Foucault in the presentation. I was thinking there might be even more because of his work on the history of folly. And I wanted to link that with what you left off towards the end, the link between levitas and gravitas, which I think Foucault really emphasizes, which he says, for you to have that, to be allowed to perform parrhesia, there needs to be that levitas that surrounds the character of the fool in the Middle Ages. So if you don't mind, this would be a good opportunity to ask you to expand on the relationship between those two terms and truth-telling as performance. Thank you.
Yes. No, I appreciate that, though, brother. You can imagine how difficult that is in a short amount of time. I mean, Foucault is somebody who's always indispensable and inadequate at the same time. You know what I mean? And that's true for most of the towering figures in that way. I mean, one of the problems is that for me, see, my terrain and trajectory tends to be in the early modern, it's much more Shakespeare, Keats, Hardy, Chekhov, Beckett, whereas Foucault was very French, which is say parochial. He's not going to engage most of those figures. So even though I learned so much from him, and the French have so much to offer, we're going to see this next week when I talk about Eric Auerbach and his preoccupation with the French, and Mimesis as a disciple of Vico, who's also then, we'll talk about him in relation to Frederick Jameson and Zaid and others. But so that the first thing I'd say about Foucault is I learned so much, yet his ways of talking about it still seem so alien to me because the particular figures that I examine are looking at the world through very, very different lens than him. Now you can imagine that's a very, there's a larger story to be told. Because Foucault himself is very French, which means he received the Cartesian indoctrination in high school and the lycées and so forth. And they're all fighting against Descartes. Most of them find Spinoza, towering figure, intellectual, explosive figure, as liberating, the way Deleuze and some of the others do. For those of us who are not caught in that Cartesian indoctrination, it's very different, you see. And so when he then makes the move to either go back to the Greeks and the discourses on the care of the self, for example, or if he politically, still ties himself to certain kind of leftist politics with no telos, no end, no aim, downplaying moral dimensions, downplaying the kind of spiritual dimensions that I talk about in terms of being explicitly tied to prophetic legacies of Jerusalem, then it's clear that we're in very different places. I was blessed actually to teach University of Paris in 1987, and the brother right next door was Daniel Defer, who was the lover, companion of Foucault for over 40 years. He was a wonderful brother. We spent a lot of time together. We'd go talk to Deleuze and Lyotard and a whole host of others. And I would just tell them, I say, oh, I just love you brothers, but oh my God, the blinders are unbelievable. And the insights are embraceable. And so that's how I would begin to answer your question, though, man. Foucault, very important. Foucault, too narrow. Unfortunately, of course, the way the professional managerial classes behave these days, it's so easy to fetishize these figures. So people mention Foucault just to show how clever and smart they are. No, this is not about smartness, it's about wisdom. It's not about cleverness, it's about compassion, courage, willingness to sacrifice. Foucault's got insights, yes, he does. A whole host of different things. Tremendous parochialism, yes, he does. Heidegger the same way. We've talked about that before. Derrida the same way. But it's true for the Americans too. It's true for the, should I say Scottish too? Yes, indeed. We all have our own limitations in that regard. But I think what we would agree on is the crucial role of historical inquiry and what he called genealogical inquiry, building on his particular reading or misreading of Nietzsche, as something that is crucial. There's no doubt about that. But thank you so much. There was a here and then here.
Professor West, thank you again for such an inspirational lecture. I've been reflecting over the last few lectures about the metaphor of music, which you have kind of elaborated on so beautifully. And the thing that I was struggling with was, as you've clearly displayed within music and within jazz, you have this infinite sophistication of nuance and attenuation, and where every note makes a difference, and you have the expertise of the player, the musician, and indeed of the listener to interpret that. And I wondered, how does that play against what you've termed our catastrophic times, where it seems as if everything around us is anything but nuanced or subtle, where things are polarized and extreme, and I struggle to find the beauty of the music that you've so artfully communicated to us. Am I just being pessimistic, and indeed within the discord that I feel around me, is there indeed a hidden music that I'm failing to see, or is it a different kind of music that we're having to listen to?
Well, I appreciate that question. It's a deep one, though, man. I would want to ask you what you would mean by finding beauty in. You have trouble finding beauty in, don't you? Could you say
so I guess what I'm saying is that when I cast my gaze around political discourse, literary discourse, just the cultural landscape around us, it's very hard nowadays, I find, to express a shade of meaning. You're either for or against. It's either black or white. It's pro or it's a very, very extreme world that I find that we're living in. And I'm wondering where the beauty of the music that you've explored with us, how can I conflate the infinite subtlety and the artistry of jazz, which just depends on, the slightest note making a difference. How can I apply that to a world where there's no room for nuance?
No, I see. No, you did clarify that in a very powerful way. I mean, one thing is that, again, catastrophe is not new. Beckett says the cries of the world are constant. The tears of the world are constant. Catastrophe is always already there. We've talked in these texts about the plagues. We've talked about the wars. We've talked about vicious forms of tyranny and so forth. The reference to genocide that's in the Ship of Fools, even by the Lutheran writer Sebastian. The catastrophes are always already there. The question becomes, we have to make sure that we're not so thoroughly seduced by the narrow Manichaean view that we can hold on to the truth, and the truth is always jagged edge. Melville used to say it's a jagged edge, it's Janus' face, and the face is bigger than both sides. Well, he didn't, I added that last part to Melville, but I think he gives me some permission from the grave to say that. Because the point is that truth is never reducible to a Manichaean view. You see. And yet at the same time, we have to have a tenacity of purpose. We have to have a resourcefulness. And of course, that is in some ways the definition of the Aristophanic hero. Cedric Whiteman and others have talked about this for decades, right? This sense of, some would call it a trickster, but it's a trickster with its moral sensibility who never, ever fits. You remember I was talking a couple of days ago about a topos? There's nothing wrong with being a topos, brother. You and I, we don't fit in a Manichaean view. But at the same time, we're in solidarity. Absolutely. But we have something inside of us that's not flattened out by the catastrophes of the world that seem to require massive polarization, massive gangsterization, which is what we're intensifying today. But I mean, the American empire has always been shot through with barbaric forms of gangsterization. It's just highly visible. George Floyd, JR, the whole world wakes up, oh my God, they're killing black folk. Welcome to the world. They've been killing black folk for 400 years. In fact, that's one of the things I was talking about in the last lecture. Malcolm X said there's been a war against indigenous people, a war against black people for 400 years. It's not just when we get these massive demonstrations, look like everybody's awakened, and then lo and behold, people have to make a choice. No, those realities are in place all the time. But you and I have to hold on to our vocation and calling, which is tied to a deep truth and beauty. Because I just got, when you said you were finding difficulty in the beauty, I was saying, my God, we've got to steal away and listen to some Coltrane together and we'll see. Oh, there's still beauty in that After the Rain, which is my favorite Coltrane song of all time. His son Robbie just played it for Anahita and I just a few months ago. Was it the Blue Note or was it that Village Vanguard? Village Vanguard. And he didn't know it was my favorite song. He said, I got just one song I've got to play no matter what. And he broke into After the Rain. I started levitating. I started defying Newton's law of gravity, And I told him after, he said, I noticed you reacted. I said, well, and he said, that's his favorite song. How did you know that? I felt that beauty inseparable from the tear, the trauma, the suffering, the pain, but that something more that our brother Jeremy has written about with such insight. It works on William James. That's something more that's not reducible to just the routine, the chronos, the breakthroughs of meaning, of love, of friendship, and so forth. Does that make sense, though, man? Yeah, I appreciate it, because that question it's a tough one for me, because you can imagine I wrestle with it all the time. Oh, absolutely. All the time. And you can imagine, you see, any kind of respond to a question like that, it's like a practical Aristotelian syllogism. It's not a proposition or a set of sentences. It's a life lived. It's action. It's deeds. So in real case, you got to live the question, live the answer. There's no theoretical resolution of it. It's like the problem of evil for theologians. Show me a theologian who's got a resolution to the problem of evil, and I'll show you a theologian who fits very nicely into what we read. Give me Dostoevsky. Give me the Grand Inquisitor. Give me the prose poem of the brother who finished that masterpiece before he dropped dead. And Dostoevsky, what is the answer? Well, holy fools, like Zosima. Connection. Erasmus, Brandt, Richard Pryor, Moms Mabley, George Carlin. What's the brother's name, Jeff? We were just talking about over lunch. MacDonald? Norm MacDonald. Those are the great exemplars of parrhesia. Fearless speech coming out of their souls, mediated with their minds, connected to traditions that know there's no theoretical resolution, but you got to live a life. You still got to respond. Your grandkids looking at you, your grandmama's still praying for you from the grave, the loved ones are still touching you. You've got to move forward. I can't go on, I will go on. I can't go on, I will go on. Thank you, Beckett. You're absolutely right. Somehow we got to hold on with perseverance and hold on with some sense of dignity and integrity. But we are, of course, overwhelmed so many times with what you're talking about, the suffering, though, brother, definitely. My dear sister, she was the third one. Yes.
I think somehow my question is connected to the previous one, but I will give you a different context.
Yes.
I love the idea that jazz is showing that we are connected, and somehow when we're playing an instrument and we are blowing, and there is something that needs to be connected with the other instruments, and we will connect with the souls and the hearts of the audience. Right. I love that. I love that the idea of harmony is also with those who are not necessarily playing an instrument at the moment, but it's also interacting with us. Behind you, the date of Gifford Lectures is 1888, when it started. And that's the abolition of slavery in Brazil, the last country being abolished in the Americas. And that's the space where I'm coming from in terms of what is informing me to ask this question. I'm informed by the Brazilian Black movement before going to university. And when I think about catastrophe right now, it's interesting that a very prestigious series of lectures were happening here since that time. And people were, Black people in Brazil were, for the first time, being able to be legitimized as free, let's say, in legal terms. But the catastrophe is still happening, right? Absolutely. And we are still trying to blow all the instruments and play all the instruments and jazz up, like what is the resistance, and at the same time, what is love and what is solidarity? Not only among us, in terms of the Black movements, in terms of the Black quilombos, the resistant movements, but the connection between us. And I think that's an amazing act of love to recognize the Black movement and the Palestinians and Sudan and Congo. But
absolutely.
What when the audience is not really jazzing with us? And these catastrophes are still happening. And the celebration of some, let's say, voices or different ways of playing that the discourses are being more celebrated in relation to our, I'm putting myself also there, in relation to our voices that have been silenced and marginalized. What then? Where, like, this radical love that we are promoting is going towards, I am not sure, I'm not sure what to do with all this jazz that we have.
Yes. No, I appreciate that, my dear sister, very much so. I mean, because, you know, history is just so thoroughly incomplete and unfinished and unpredictable. And because we've seen so often various cycles of domination, cycles of violence, cycles of organized greed and institutionalized hatred, that we want to be mindful of trying to sustain our moments of interruption that don't fall back into those cycles and still sustain the solidarity against the structures and institutions. Because you remember, I started off talking about death, dogma, and domination. So you always want to connect wrestling with forms of death, that's spiritual, physical, social, civic, and so on. Right? And dogma, be it religious, ideological, the scientific dogma, skepticism itself can become a dogma. Right? So it's good to be skeptical about skepticism. And resulting in, as Emerson says, in the face of skepticism, the moral sentiment. It always kicks in. So nobody really believes that the death of a mosquito on the wall has the same value as the death of your mother. Now you may want to be rigorous in your skepticism and say the mosquito and the death of my mother have the same value. No, the moral sentiment kicks in. Love your mom, mosquito, you got to go. There's a human connection and attachment that's there that the skeptic can never, ever be able to come to terms with. The great Michael LeBurnt wrote a famous essay called Can the Skepticism Live His or Her Skepticism? Well, so it is when it comes to history. Because when you look at the catastrophe in Brazil and other places, you see it repeated over and over again. But you see breakthroughs. You know, Zula is in some sense different than the neo-fascist who he replaced. What was his name? Bolsonaro. You see what I mean? But Lula's no Messiah. He's a cracked vessel like everybody else. Right? I was blessed to go to Brazil. Brazil was the first country that translated Race Matters. 1994. It was the Portuguese Race Matters. Can you come down to lecture? Absolutely. I was blessed to lecture in 26 favelas. Had the time of my life. And at that time, Lula was working with the Workers' Party. There's no idea he'd be president. He was lucky and full of grace just to keep his Workers' Party together that we were working with at the time. And we had a number of liberation theologians there at the time. When I go through the names, Hugo Osman and others with the Christian-based communities that was connecting it to a certain kind of spirituality. We struggled with Leonardo Buff, who was excommunicated by who? The Pope. Right now. We had struggled with him. He's pre-Pope at that time. And he's growing and so forth, but we had these kind of struggles. But the crucial thing is, you never, ever give up. Because if you're true to that vitality, that virtuosity, that vibrancy of not just the music, but what goes into the making of the music, which is the deep humanity, then you don't give up. And that's the history of struggle in Brazil at its best. Just like our precious Palestinian brothers and sisters right now. They're not giving up. They're still walking with smiles, with scars and bruises. Babies dead, grandmothers killed, and so forth and so on. You see, you just hope and pray that they're holding on at the same time to the moral and spiritual dimensions and let them know that the response in the end is like Emmett Till's mother. It's not going to be hating all Jews. It's going to be hating vicious Israeli forms of genocide and ethnic cleansing. And there will be prophetic Jewish voices that will agree. How do you walk that tightrope? That's the crucial role. And that's one that we see in Brazil. We're going to see that. We've seen in other parts of the world. Our Muslim brothers and sisters, our Islamic brothers and sisters, and a host of others have the same kind of challenges relative to their own traditions. In the same way in which, Modi slaps Gandhi in the face every day from the grave as a Hindu. Every day. Hijacking. A certain kind of Hinduism. Gandhi, what you think? I understand what the critics, I understand even my precious Dalits, even though he didn't necessarily meet the challenge of his day, he probably bounced back and said, I'm with my Dalits and my Muslims and my prophetic Hindus and even my secular Marxists in India. as it moves toward its own distinctive form of crypto-fascism. That's the beginning of an answer to your question. It'd take much more to really wrestle with it all. But I just hope and pray that you don't give up hope. You remain encouraged, and you remain tied to your own distinctive quest for truth and beauty and goodness, because in the end, it is an existential question. It really is. Each one of us have our lives to live in regard to our connection and relation with others in community and tradition, with memory, as well as future. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. I'm going to call a halt now to the questions, and thank you to everybody because we've run out of time. And I think we've worked you very hard, and you deserve a drink and something to eat. So I want to again to thank Professor West very, very warmly. Of course, what's brilliant about this series is it is a series. So the conversations will go on, the questions that are there, more opportunities in future lectures to come back, to continue the conversation and to enjoy again, the brilliance that you've represented tonight. So thank you very much to everybody. And thank you everyone for watching, for engaging, all those behind the scenes as well who've helped to support make the event such a success up to this point. And also to Glowcast, thank you very much for the live streaming. I'm sure the audience is extremely grateful for your skill there. So there are 3 remaining lectures. They'll all be also live streamed for those without the golden tickets to come and see you in person. And details are available on the website, the Gifford. If you Google, I'm told, the Gifford on the website, on the university website, you will find all the details. We also have a Gifford Lecture Series blog, which we would welcome everybody to continue the conversation on the blog, and details again can be found on the website. So I just want to ask everybody to thank Professor West again for such a brilliant lecture.